transparency is a super big thing for me, and setting that as a foundational element of my working relationship with my team is extremely important, because without that, you have a much more difficult time building a foundation of trust and respect.
Hey, Uncommon Leaders, welcome back. This is the Uncommon Leader Podcast, and I'm your host, John Gallagher. Tammy Klotz, welcome to the Uncommon Leader Podcast. Great to have you on the show today. How you doing?
I'm great, John. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
I am as well. And I know just getting to know you just a little bit before we jumped online, I think we're going to have a fantastic conversation today. But I don't give anybody any breaks first time through. I'll start you off with the first question. I always start my first time guests, and that's asking you to tell me a story from your childhood that still impacts who you are as a person or as a leader today.
Sure. So I'm searching the memory bank, but I can talk to you about, I was in fourth or fifth grade. And the reason I can't discern what year it was is that I had the same teacher in both fourth and fifth grade. So that was a unique opportunity. But she honestly has been very impactful in my life. For a very long time. So from those early days, but she's also been a part of my life through my marriage, through my divorce, through my birth of my two children, my graduation, etc. So she's been a presence for me. But the reason I picked this one is that during class, the one day, she was extremely frustrated with the behaviors that were going on in the class. And I don't remember all of the specifics, but there were two of us, my friend Jeanette and myself, who were called out by the teacher. Her name was actually Rebecca Harmony at that point in time. And she exemplified us as the individuals in the organization, sorry, not the organization, the classroom, that were demonstrating the behaviors that she was looking for the rest of the class to actually emulate. So I think in the context and in reflection, that's one that I would say, from an influence perspective, definitely kind of struck a chord with me and stood out from a leadership perspective going forward. So that is this story that I will share with you.
I love fourth and fifth grade stories that generate. So fourth grade for me was Mrs. Nolan. Fifth grade was Sister Nicodema, lefty. Both of them lefties.
Oh, goodness, yes.
Paddling lefties. Okay, so that was Catholic school. You're able to still get paddled at that point in time, but I do remember that as well. But great teachers both had positive impact on me as well. Yeah, impact, paddle, yeah, whatever we want to go with. But it's something about that age group that tends to have some of the influence. And I love when we can go back to teachers who made a positive influence, but certainly them being able to recognize those traits in you early on was pretty cool. And it's something when they call it out that you memorize for a long time. So that's really cool. Excellent. But we're not here to talk about, fifth grade stories necessarily the whole time, although they may impact it. We're here to talk about your book. So I want to take the time here to talk about your bio and then connect it to your book so that the listeners have a little bit of context as we go through. So you currently serve as the Chief Information Security Officer with Trinzio. You joined them in October 2023, and you're in the process of defining cybersecurity strategy, and you intend to improve the overall security posture of the organization with a focus on securing production operations across a fleet of 24 manufacturing sites and 11 R&D facilities. You have goals for increased cybersecurity training and awareness for the 3,400 person workforce, as well as building a more robust third-party risk management program for Trinzio. Holy smoke. I don't know how long that it took to go through that, but I love that. And you just wrote a book recently and published it called, you can see behind your back, Leading with Empathy and Grace. Help me tie those two things together, because I'm an engineer and I often get said, you don't talk like an engineer. You talk about leadership so much. I can't connect all that cybersecurity jazz and all the responsibility you have with leading with empathy and grace, especially in a large company. So tell me more.
I love that question, John, because what I've been told, and I actually have a prop that I should have brought with me, but I tend to be a unicorn in the space, right? Because typically, a lot of the CISOs or chief information security officers have kind of started out in much more of that engineering technical kind of disposition in the role, and very much focused on tools and technology, right? Where the role is evolving to is very much focused on your communication capabilities with the executive leadership team, being able to talk about business impact in terms of language that the business can understand from a risk perspective. So definitely not about, all of the techie terms that come in the security space. And really thinking about how to embrace when there's a new technology that somebody wants to use, whether that be AI, whether that be quantum computing, whatever the latest and greatest is. And oftentimes those things can be, shunned by the security office as the office of, no, we can't do that because it's not secure, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we try to shift the narrative and make it about, okay, so help me understand why you want to do this and what value is it going to bring to the organization. And then we can talk about how we're going to do that so that we can continue to keep the organization secure, but we also get to take advantage of that new technology. So there's a way to do it, and that really boils down to how you deliver your message, and the points that you make to your constituents, to your internal clients about that, because you want to be perceived as a team player, as part of the fabric that helps move the company forward, but in such a way that it can be done securely. So when I talk to my executive team, and it also traverses down the organization as well, because you've got to be in this role that allows you to translate also from the techie speak to the business speak, and
Mm-hmm.
then vice versa, right? Back to the team as to what's important. So for me, the empathy and grace piece of that is really around active listening, effective communication, and really bringing in a lot of different perspectives and thought processes, and talking about it in such a way that is comprehensible to whatever audience that you're talking to at that point in time. So it is a balance, and I think the other part of the book that I'm sure we'll touch on is about how do you build high performing teams using empathy and grace as
Mm-hmm.
well. And I think that's inherent in, a high stress type of role that cyber can be in an organization, and how you navigate and manage both yourself and your teams through some of the crazy times that we're faced with.
Well, we are going to dive into that, no doubt about it. So, ultimately your work history is a, myriad of those CISO opportunities. And again, you mentioned too, working with the executive team. So many different levels you've got to lead with empathy and grace in
Mhm.
your space. It's leading up in the organization, across with your peers, and then to your point, down in the organization as well. So you've written the book, Leading with Empathy and Grace,
Mhm.
that I'm sure has is loaded with stories that you talk about in that. But who did you write it for, and why did you
Mm.
decide to write it now?
So I'll answer the second question first. So why
Mhm.
did I decide to write it now? In 2023, I actually ended my employment on my terms with my current organization. I needed a break, and I recognized that. And I told myself that I was going to take some time off to kind of purge, right? And kind of
Mhm.
reset. And I actually had some pretty significant milestones going on in my life personally. So my oldest daughter was graduating from college and getting established. My mom was transitioning into a nursing home. So pretty big life
Mm.
transition periods for both of them. And I really wanted to take the time to be present for them without any distractions. So that is the time frame then in which I said, okay, I've always wanted to do this book thing. And the inspiration for the book came from one of my prior leaders at the company I spent 24 years um, at Air Products and Chemicals. And he told me early in my career that he wanted me to teach people to lead the way that I did. And I kind of looked at him and I was like, okay, but this is kind of just who I am. Like, I don't know how to teach somebody that. And he's like, yes, you do. He's like, you just need to figure out how to do that. Right. So tuck that away. I now have this chunk of time where I've decided to take some time off. And, there's something to be said for how LinkedIn or Facebook knows what you're thinking because somebody's always listening, whatever, right?
Right.
So I started getting all of
You would
these.
know cybersecurity. You would
Yeah.
know. I mean,
I started getting all of these prompts on LinkedIn. Have you ever thought of wanting to write a book? And I was like, okay. So I said, okay, why not now? Right. And I used that time to one, help my mom and my oldest daughter, and then also use that as time for me to make something that I had, always wanted to do become a reality, and really went through kind of a mini RFP process for myself that says, who am I going to work with? Why do I want to work with these people? And I started in August of 2023, and the book got published April 1st of 2024. So that talks to both the timing, why now, and also the inspiration for the book. Your question around for whom is really for anybody who is in a leadership role of any sort, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a leader that's responsible for a team and has a team of direct reports. It could be somebody that's leading a project, somebody that's leading a nonprofit organization, whether that be in scouts or anything else that people are involved in externally, in outside of their professional lives. Because I think the things that I talk about throughout the course of the book are really applicable to any type of leadership role that an individual is a part of.
I love that. So there's a certain humility in how you bring this out as well. It's just who I am.
Mhm.
Okay. In terms of you have a former boss asking you that you should write about your leadership style, and you say, it's just who I am. And I think that's frankly some of the power inside of leadership, the authenticity
Mm.
that exists in that world. But there's a level of the size of the companies that you would work with, and probably in the chemical space, you talked about product and manufacturing space now, and probably other organizations as well. Was there a time that you recognized your leadership style was different, and maybe where it would have been a hindrance for you and how it helped you as well on both sides?
So yes, and I'll go back to again my early career days at Air Products. We were going through some organizational development activities, right? And at that point in time, that's when Myers-Briggs typing
Hmm.
was a big thing. So we did that across my peer group and with our boss at that point in time. And in chemical manufacturing in corporate, in the company culture that I was in, ISTJ was kind of the classic. And as an engineer, you probably can relate to that as
Hmm.
well, right? That's kind of the classic type. So, how I knew I was different is I was an ISFP or ESFP. So the complete opposite
True. Right.
of the
Right.
ISTJ, right? So that was kind of the first, like, oh yeah, okay, right?
And they
So
have you stand in the room at different places, right? And they're like,
yeah, everybody
"Why is
go here,
Tammy over
and
there?"
there's
Yeah.
always two of us
Oh
in
yeah.
that
Yeah.
box or whatever, right? So yeah, so and then a lot of it over the as I moved into the cybersecurity field, and really established myself in that industry over the past 10 years, I am sometimes not as aware of it as I should be, but there's been many either stories or comments that folks have shared with me, and that's why That's why I wrote the book the way that I did, because I wanted it to be a conversation with whoever was reading it. It
Mm,
wasn't going to be academic. It wasn't going to be step by step. It's like, these are some real life examples of things that have worked for me in the past. And as I was putting the book together, I also, as I was working with my angel writer, I said to her, I don't just want this to be me, right? It needs to be validated,
mm,
right? So we actually, I came up with a list of about 60 people that I had either worked with, worked for, or they had worked for me, and asked them to share some of their experiences so that my angel writer would be able to kind of grasp, who I was,
mhm.
and really talk and um, uh, represent me accurately as we went through that development process.
So you wrote August 2023, published April 2024, Angel Writer to Help.
Mhm.
So in 8 months, you published that 300-page book, and they interviewed 60 other people as well. Like that's phenomenal for one thing. Like that's unheard of in terms of how quickly from ideation to
Mm,
publishing the book. So that's in and of itself a great accomplishment.
thank
But
you.
again, you touched on it with regards to telling a story, and you wanted it to be examples of what was happening. Is there a story or an example in the book that you really remember that just typifies who you are, and
Yes.
it especially strikes you?
Yeah, and one of the one I'll share with you is really around, how to keep your team motivated and how to really sustain an organization that you've built, right? And one of the things that I tend to do in all of my team meetings is I always end a team meeting with a motivational moment
Hmm.
that's either focused on current business conditions, maybe a certain milestone that's coming from a project perspective, or the fact that everybody's completely overwhelmed and it's really just time to stop and recharge your batteries. And it's, perfectly acceptable and required to actually do that. So I'll end every meeting like that. But one of the things that I had done during my time at Covanta is it was a lot of business change. So got bought by private equity, new leadership team came in, a lot of uncertainty around what the future of the organization was going to be, and a lot of demand on the organization. So I'm a big visual person, and tangible, right? So one of those motivational moments was around, there was a quote that I shared from Disney that was focused on all you need is faith, trust, and a little bit of pixie dust.
Hmm.
Peter Pan and Tinkerbell, right? All in play there. And I actually ended up finding on Etsy a keychain that had a little vial of pixie dust and the two tags that said faith and trust on it. And I gave that to everybody on the team.
Oh wow.
And there were a lot of men on the team as well. So not necessarily probably more of a feminine touch.
Hmm.
But the blessing for me on the other side of that is to see afterwards all of them had it on their backpack, on their desk, or with them as a reminder of what we were going through and the fact that yes, it was going to be hard work, but we were going to be able to get through it together as a group.
I love that. I love the little motivational moments too. Just those little touching things. I mean, again, I got stories of them all up on my bookcase, and
Mm,
several of them. Even that one's probably 25 years old as a gift from employees and things like that. Just little memories of what was happening. Pens that have sayings on them or
mhm.
slogans are really care really cool. Now you touched on that team development component, and you've used the term high performing team. So Eh, talk about that just a little bit more. What is that? What is a high performing team, if you will? And then how did you foster that environment to be
Sure.
successful?
So, you can when you walk into a new team, right? It can take on a variety of different dynamics. It can be, a new team to you because you've recently joined an organization and they're having to assimilate to the fact that There's, the new boss that they need to figure out. There's also, okay, I've been given two teams as a result of reorganization, and I have
Hmm.
to figure out how to make them mesh and work together. So there's different, do you always have the opportunity to cherry pick who you want on your team? Usually not. So it's really figuring out what makes everybody tick. So a couple of things that I'll share with you is one, um, getting alignment within and across the team of what the goals and objectives are for the organization becomes paramount, because everybody has to be on the same page with regards to what we're working towards. And if there are things that are noisy in the background that are preventing us from accomplishing those things, those are the things that we need to address and figure out how we're going to deal with them. Whether that means we're going to say we're not doing that particular thing, or we're going to do it, but that means something else is going to have to, take a back seat for a period of time. So aligning on goals and objectives and being a reminder, a consistent reminder to the team that is first and foremost. The other thing is really around, there's a topic in the book that I talk about around tipsy,
Hmm.
the tipsy principles. So these are some things that I really instill in my teams when I work with them. Tipsy stands for transparency, togetherness, inclusion, presence, participation, and consistency. And transparency is a super big thing for me. And setting that as a foundational element of my working relationship with my team is extremely important, because without that, you don't, you have a much more difficult time building a foundation of trust and respect. So transparency comes into play when I'm going to tell you what I can and what I know, but if there may be things that I'm not going to be able to tell you, because with my place in the organization, I may know some things that are not public or they're still confidential and I can't share with you. Also, if you ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, I'm not going to make something up to pretend I know the answer to it. I'm going to tell you that I don't know, and I will go find out what the answer is for you. So that transparency around what is going on, acknowledging, where potentially I don't have all the information, again, builds that, is the start of the relationship building, right? Togetherness, I mean, this is, something, again, it's one of those soft words, and
Hmm.
I hate that description. So everybody knows what I mean when I say it, but I really like to refer to those as critical skills, especially when you're dealing with human beings, and we're all human beings, and we really need to foster that teamwork between the folks who are spending so much time together, more time with us as a team in a lot of cases than their actual families, just because of the work week dynamic and the demands. So togetherness is, how do you form some bonds? And one of the examples I'll share with you that I do today with my current team is, everybody's geographically dispersed. There's only 3 of us that are in the same office. Everybody else is elsewhere around the world. So how do we do that? Like, we can't go to happy hour together, we
Hmm.
can't go bowling or whatever. So we actually instituted a Friday fun Teams meeting, right? On Fridays, 9:30 every Friday. That speaks to consistency. And everybody just comes. The only rule is that there's no talk about work. So it's, what are you doing this weekend? What do the kids have going on? Are you going on vacation? Did you buy a new car? Anything from that perspective, because what we've found is that those are the ways that you form an outside of work bond. And
Hmm.
in some cases, you would never know you shared that. I have one member on the team right now who's a huge Marvel comic fanatic, right? So we wouldn't have known that if we wouldn't have had those
That's
conversations,
right.
right? But now when something, comes across, we can go, oh, Harshal would really like this, or because it makes you it creates that human element that I'm so focused on. Even when I join an organization, I meant to mention this earlier, is I do a presentation. It's a Who Am I
Hmm.
presentation that talks about, Tammy, the person, not Tammy, the CISO. So we talk about my family, we talk about the activities that I'm involved in, my leadership styles embedded in there, because again, it breaks down that, oh, she's the CISO. So because I am a human being in the end as
Very
well.
cool. When you
Include, I'm
when you
sorry.
think it's, I was just curious, like these letters we're going to go in those. Did they come to you over time, or these are the ones you sat down as a group and put together, or
No, these are mine,
those are
right?
you? Okay, okay,
So
good, good,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
all
And
right.
it is like, again, not being able to see some of that because I'm so close to it. Everybody who talks to me about the book, this is the thing that everybody picks up
Hmm.
on, right? And asks me about. So it's turned into it's a little surreal, right?
Hmm.
Because it's part of the branding now.
Sure, absolutely.
Um, so inclusion is the I in Tipsy. And again, there's a lot of focus and has been growing over time around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this is the continuation of that, right? But it's really around making sure, and this is maybe a little bit of a flip on it, is that from an inclusive perspective, making sure as a leader that I am equally accessible to every member of my team. So there's no perceived favorites, right? Because that would
Mhm.
be bad. And really making sure that they know their time with me is their time. And they should use that time wisely, but I'm also here to help them. And that is our one-on-one opportunity to talk about those types of things. Similarly, if you go to presence, then, and in today's world, this can be a challenge because we're all behind our
Mhm.
screens, usually not in a meeting room together. And we are creatures of multitasking. So when you are not fully present with your audience, it's usually pretty obvious, right? So making sure that you're free of distraction when you're meeting one-on-one with a member of your team. You don't want them to think that something is
Mm.
more important than them at that point in time.
Sure.
Participation, making sure everybody has an opportunity to contribute. My team meetings, I will usually update individuals on what's going on from an HR perspective, what are some important dates that they need to know about, whether it's benefits enrollment, all of the kind of the administrative piece of it. But then as we go through the team meeting, everybody has an opportunity to share, whether
Good.
that's the project that they're working on, whether that is, um, you know, what's the one thing that everybody on the team should know about that you learned this week, right? So it's really just an opportunity to make sure that everybody is contributing to the conversation and the dialogue. And then the last part of Tipsy, the C, is really around consistency. Making sure you show up when you say you're going to show up. If you're doing a monthly team meeting, make sure it's happening at the same time, as much as you can, right?
Sure.
But what you don't want to be doing is like rescheduling it and moving it around because it's the first thing that gets bumped. That's not what I like to create. I like them to know when it's happening, what the agenda is going to be. We try to follow a set agenda with special topics as appropriate, and being consistent in your messaging and walking the talk. That's been a huge part of the vulnerability for me actually writing the book, because it's in black and white and they all have a copy of it.
Yep.
So to say to them now, I'm like, okay, so if I'm saying something in the book that I'm not doing on a daily basis, you are allowed to call me out. And so that again breaks down that barrier.
I love that because again, and the consistency, even whether it's, it makes the acronym more fun because you can say tipsy, but having at the end is being consistent with the first five as well in terms of understanding that, discipline, good intention. You can have good intention with it, but if you don't have discipline or consistency along with it, it just leads to excuses. You hear those things all the time, but if you can keep it in line with good discipline, with good consistency, then you have a chance of reaching excellence. Absolutely. Something I talk about often. I appreciate those. I mean, I would imagine you've probably got stories where you've had to have conversation with folks who maybe violated one of those values and how you had to stress that importance to them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm trying to think of I mean, an example that I can share with you, and this maybe not is so much around the tipsy principles, but it's around some of the qualities that I talk about of a great leader in the book. And again, this particular example was not for anybody who was, necessarily having a team of direct reports, but they were responsible for a
Hmm.
project work stream. And we were partnering with an external party to stand up a new service. And it was a constant, oh, well, look what they're doing. Look what they're doing. They're not doing it this way. They're not doing it the right way. And I literally had to, sit down with that person and look at them and say, okay, you are responsible for this project work stream. There's no there's no they, it's we, right? So if they succeed, you succeed, we all succeed. If they fail, you fail, we all fail. So building that sense of accountability in individuals as well from a leadership perspective, you can't the blame game doesn't work because you're part of it.
Of that. So important. If we folks get folks to take responsibility for their activities and own
Yes.
it, we'd be in a much better place. Um, outside of that, like you're a leader, like very, very structured, the values are there. The other side of that is also, we'll say, outside of the workplace and self care. And I
Mm,
know that's important to you. You mentioned developing resilience in
mm.
life roles as well. What are some ways you, uh, in essence, take care of yourself leading a global team, which can't be easy, a large team inside an organization, making sure you can also take care of yourself and as well as continue to address those life roles that you have.
Yeah, so self-care is extremely important. And it varies over, your personal life and your professional life and how those two need to blend together, right?
Mhm.
So some of the things that I'll focus on, there's actually a whole chapter on self-care in the book. And the first one is really around knowing your boundaries.
Mm.
And when I coach and mentor folks, we talk about this a lot, right? Whether it's because they're looking for a new position, whether it's because they're not quite happy with how things are working in their existing position, but it's really an exercise in self-awareness to reflect and say, okay, what am I willing to compromise and what am I not willing to compromise? And writing those things down as a mental reminder for yourself and then holding yourself accountable to those.
Mhm.
And the example that I like to share for me personally, that resonates with that particular um, um, boundary conversation is around when I was raising my girls, I raised them as a single mom. And I also had responsibility for taking care of my mom as the primary caregiver, and I was working full time.
Mhm.
And I was always transparent in my communications about where I was going to be and when I was going to be there. So there was a particular Friday afternoon or Friday morning where I sent an email to the team, including my boss, my peer group, and said, look, I got to take my mom to a doctor appointment this morning. The girls have their end of camp, weekly, performance Friday afternoon. So I'll be online later this afternoon. And my boss at the time, he replied to my email and he goes, so are you working today? Or are you taking vacation today? And I said, well, let me ask you a different question. I said, is my job getting done? And that was pivotal in changing that working relationship
Mhm.
between he and I. And I said, look, I said, if you're telling me I have to take a vacation day, I will do that. But previously it would not have mattered because if I'm not working Friday morning, I'm probably working Saturday morning or
Mhm.
Sunday night to make up that time to make sure that my deadlines are met and that my deliverables are being achieved. So I knew I had to be present for my children and my mom. But I also knew what my other responsibilities were and just needed to kind of, you know, adjust things a little bit. And
Sure.
one of my dear friends, she's recently come back to me about this particular topic, and she's like, "But Tammy," she's like, how did you know it was okay to do that?" And I said, "I didn't have a choice. It had to be okay." Right. So those are, that's an example from a boundaries perspective of what's most important to you and where your priorities need to lie.
Sure. And to your point, it's also in support of Tipsy with the transparency that you're talking about as well, letting folks know what you have going on. So there's no question
No
with regards to,
question.
yeah,
Yeah,
with what's going on.
absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely. So,
So let's do the book test. Folks are going to read your book. They're going to write the review on Amazon and give you a 5-star, of course, is what they'll do. And then they're going to set it on a bookshelf, just like I got behind me. They're going to set
mm,
it on a bookshelf. A year later, they're going to be going through their books and they're going to see the binding of the book, and it's going to be sitting there. What do you want them to think when they see your book after having read it and after they see it there for a year?
so what I want them to think about when they, come back to it is one, first of all, if it's somebody that I've had the opportunity to personally sign the book, I want them to remember the moment in which that happened. And I did do a book signing in May in the King of Prussia area here in Pennsylvania, and I was overwhelmed with the response.
Hmm.
There were over 140 people
Oh,
that
wow.
came, and so my approach was I wanted to write a personal message in everybody's book. Well, the gentleman who was working with me to run the book signing, he's like, "You're taking too long. You're taking too long. Just sign your name." And I was like, "I can't do that. That's not who I am. That's not the authentic me." So if it's somebody that I've, been fortunate enough to be able to write that person, I want them to remember that
Hmm.
moment, and what that book means to them. If I haven't had the opportunity, I think, the uniqueness of what comes from the book and remembering that first and foremost, we're all human beings and we need to focus on how people feel and how we make them feel. One of the quotes that I also have in the book is a Maya Angelou quote, which is really around the fact that people will not remember what you said or what you did, but you will remember how they made you feel. And that
Amen.
is important to me.
Amen. They will absolutely remember how you made them feel. No doubt about it. I love that. Tammy, how do folks get in touch with you? I look at my time and I can't believe how fast our time has gone. I committed to you to some time, but how do folks get in touch with you?
Sure. So the best way right now, John, is to look me up on LinkedIn. I'm currently in the process of putting together a website, but that's not quite ready yet. But LinkedIn is the best way. My only ask is that if you're going to connect to me, please tell me why you're connecting and how. And if that's because you picked up my book and read my book, that's what I want to know. So I know what that personal connection is. And then the book is available on Amazon. And if you do read it and love it, I would love the review as well, because apparently there's some magic algorithm at
I,
Amazon as well. So would love that also.
I, I think you're right. Tammy, you've been such a gracious guest with your time, with sharing your story and understanding, and I've enjoyed our conversation. I want to give you the last word, and I know I teed it up for you before we hit the record button just a
Mhm.
little bit, but it's a chance for you to give a message to those that you want to talk to, that have listened in, who I know have gained value. But you get a billboard, you can put it anywhere you want to. What's the message you're going to put on that billboard, and why do you put that message on there?
It's actually easy now that I kind of paused and thought about it. It
Hmm.
just says with empathy and grace,
Hmm.
full stop.
Well,
And, my goal is I want to do at least two more books focused on
okay.
living with empathy and grace and loving with empathy and grace. So I've started to sign my emails with empathy and grace. So it's kind of become my brand. So that's what I would put on the billboard.
There you go. Fantastic. Put a little hashtag in front of it. Let it just
Yes,
become viral. Absolutely. With empathy and
absolutely.
grace. Tammy
So
Klotz, it's been a lot of fun chatting. I enjoyed our time and our conversation. I wish you the
mhm.
best in this book and the next two books that are coming out as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the opportunity, John. I enjoyed our time together as well.